Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. Man, I do not know how I always get surprised by these ban lists, and yet, or more specifically, whenever they come out. But alas, here we are. Master Duel has just done a post-Worlds ban list, and it's changed quite a bit, I think. Haven't seen any games thus far. This is literally right after the ban list, and I am going to do a tier list based on the new ban list, because I do think that it does shake up quite a bit, not just because of the top decks changing, but actually because of how the top decks are changing, and specifically, does that push other decks out? How does that fare against other such decks? And so, yeah, we're gonna go through quite a bit of the decks that are currently playable, and we're gonna go through them real quick. ABC is fine. Abyss Actor is pretty bad, let's be honest with ourselves. Adamantipator received quite a big hit. Notably, Block Dragon is now banned. And here's the thing. Block Dragon was the glue that genuinely held Adamantipator together. It's pretty bad now. Grass also got limited to 1, which means even the Grass version of the deck with like 60 cards and a whole bunch of like milling and stuff like that, even with Block Dragon banned, like you still could have played that version. It wouldn't have been as useful though. So because of that, I do really genuinely think that this deck is just not very good. I'm going to put it in Rogue, but honestly, it could fall down to everything else. It could be genuinely unplayable, even though this deck was very good. But that's how good Block Dragon was. Atagnister is still kicking. It's fine. I believe this is... what is the name? Altergeist. Altergeist. Yeah, Altergeist is there. Amazement's bad. Amazonas is bad. Ancient Gear is bad. Ancient Warriors are fine. They're like a rogue tier. What's this? Armed Dragons? Yeah, they're pretty bad. Bees, they're fine. Blackwings are maybe rogue. Blue Eyes is obviously pretty bad. Branded actually did receive quite a bit of a nerf. However, what I'm going to say is that I do believe Branded is still fine. With Branded Fusion at 1, that does hurt a lot. However, you still have quite a bit of playability with Branded, and on top of that, with tier still being playable and having enough names, I do think that it is very playable to play Branded tier. However, I do think that it does drop quite a bit. So I put it up like near the top at like top 3 or top 4 best decks, and now I do believe it's probably at the bottom of tier 2. It wasn't that big of a hit if you think about it. Like, realistically, yeah, Branded Fusion went from 2 to 1, but nothing really changed. But the fact that now, if you actually stop the Branded Fusion, it's just kind of dead, is a big, you know, change, right? Also, there is a high likelihood that your opponent is now a lot less likely to actually draw into that Branded Fusion, which does matter. So I am going to say that, overall, I'm going to say it's, like, probably bottom of tier 2. Next up, we have Crusadia. Crusadia is just not good. Same with all of these decks that are coming up here. None of them are great. Dark World is interesting. I think that, honestly, it doesn't really do anything right now. It does spin its gears quite a bit and then end on like an Appaloosa and just pray. But honestly, I really don't see a lot of players even knowing how to play Dark World. But more specifically, even when they do, it's not really doing a whole lot unless they get very lucky. So I really don't think that it's consistent enough to actually warrant it being very high. I'm going to put it above a lot of this other crap. But yeah, there you go. Dark Lords are bad, I'm sorry. Despia is something that we've already talked about with Branded, so I'm just going to put this down here at the bottom. Despia, Branded are basically co-linked. They just play together very well. This is also, sorry, I should have mentioned this previously, but this list is entirely for a best of 1 climbing the ladder in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So it is not for tournaments, this is not for anything else. It is solely a tier list for best of 1s, for climbing the best, what's going to be the best deck for climbing, what are you expecting to see a whole bunch of, etc., etc. There you go. And because of that, the reason I brought this up here is because I do think that Dinomorphia is a little bit better because of that best of 1 situation. If this were a best of 3, if this were a tournament, if this was known quantity, knowing what your opponent is playing, I do think that Dinomorphia gets a lot worse. But because it is that best of 1, and not a lot of people actually have outs to a lot of the Dinomorphia stuff, I do think that it is actually, well, actually, no, hold on. I'm actually going to put this lower. I think I would have put this at tier 3, maybe last format, but I'm going to put this at the top of Rogue, and I'm going to explain why in a second. Dinosaur is good. It's very heavily slept on deck. It's very strong. It's consistent with the triple block, or with the triple Miscellaneousaurus, with the, I believe Oviraptor is now at 3. I could be wrong, but I believe they changed that on one of the ban lists. But more specifically, just I do think that this is one of the most slept on decks. I don't expect it to be represented very heavily, but I do expect this to be a good deck, and especially in a best of 1, being able to just like summon Pank from deck is very powerful. And overall, I do think that it's a good deck. Dogmatica is just mid. It's not very good. However, it does get a little bit better due to tier being less common, because now if you actually activate the Albazoa, you're less likely to have your opponent immediately start playing the game. So there's that. Dragonlink. Dragonlink is probably the best deck. I'm going to say hesitantly it's the best, because I do think Sprite has a shot at being the best with Sprite for hire. But I do think that Dragonlink is probably the best, and this is why I genuinely believe that that Dinomorphia is probably a little bit lower. And the reason for that is because Dinomorphia actually does have a bit of a problem with Dragonlink because of 1, Bestials, and 2, Seals. Seals is actually so good against this deck because, hey, that Rexstrom you have is useless because I have a 0 attack point monster, which means no matter what, I will be able to probably activate its effect, which is very, very nice. So, no matter what, I will probably be able. Don't think about it. Dragon Maids aren't very good. Neither is Dream Mirror. Neither is. Okay, Drytron. Maxi exists. Maxi still exists. Somehow, they identified things like Rongo, Bish Balkan, Block Dragon, and the like to be problem cards, and they ignored the 90% play rate card of Maxi. Don't know why we decided to do this, but until Maxi gets banned, Drytron cannot get out of Rogue. Period. That's just a fact. At the moment, the decks are too powerful for Drytron to actually compete against a meta full of the cockroach. It's that simple. Therion is a deck. Not good. Eldritch is still fine. Endymion is not good. Evil Eye is bad. Live Twin is one of the first variants of Sprite that we could talk about. However, again, because of the limitation to both Jet at 1 and Starter and Blue at 2, I do think that Sprite Live Twin is just not nearly as good, and I don't really see much viability in it. I could see it being maybe playable, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as good, just because, like, I mean, it's not like it's changing that much, because I think Sprite Jet was at 2 previously, so it's not really changing that much, but I still think that, like, it does hurt the deck quite a bit, but if we're talking just Live Twin, it'd be like Rogue. I'm going to put it in tier... I'm going to put it in tier 3 for now. Yeah. I think Sprite Live Twin is still playable, just not nearly as good. Exosister is... I'm going to put it in tier 3. I think it's good. I think it's good for climbing the ladder. I think it did get a hit because it lost literally its best matchup. But I still, even without that, I mean, a Banish 3 is still a Banish 3, or Banish 4, technically. So I still think that that's good. It's not like it lost completely its best matchup, because Dragonlink is still good. Or I should say, it's still a good matchup for Exo. So it's you know, there. Flu is still good. I don't know. It will never die. It's playable. I don't know what else to say. It's playable. Fright Fur. Okay. For Hire Sprite is probably the best version of Sprite now, because generally you actually don't care about most of those limitations to the Sprite cards. you just kind of need a certain amount of them. For example, 2 Sprite, Blue, and 1 Jet is pretty good, all things considered, and oftentimes you will not even notice the limitation changes. You're playing 1 starter anyway most of the time, you're playing the 1 Jet, you're playing, you know, I mean, having the 3rd Blue would be nice, but other than that, most of the changes to the actual Sprite decks, or more specifically the 2 Turbo decks, don't actually hit this deck in particular. Yes, the runic limitations do hurt, but I don't think that that matters enough. I still think that this deck is very powerful. It ends on some pretty insane boards. It can play through quite a bit, and it has a lot going for it, especially with the insane advantage engine that is for hire Sprite runic. It's kind of insane. You just get to make a board every turn, and on top of that, you also generate like 6 cards every turn as well. Just drawing that many. It's really good. I do think that it is probably the most slept on deck at the moment, but it is also complicated and very expensive, so I do understand. Not going to talk about Gem Knights. We're going to talk about Generator. Generator is pretty decent right now. I'm going to put it at the top of Rogue for now. It's fine. Being able to, like, Jormungandr eat stuff is pretty nice, or I guess it would be Leviathan, in order to, like, eat specific cards. It's nice, but I don't think it matters too much. It's still just inconsistent. Ghost Strike is bad. Goaty is pretty decent. It's not crazy, but it's up there. I'm gonna actually put it above ABC probably. Glad Beast is just bad. Goki's, I mean, Maxi exists. Ishizu is literally dead now. I genuinely don't think that there is like an Ishizu deck that can do anything with a singular Kel deck as your milling options, and 2 other shufflers, which the shufflers are nice but not nearly as good as the millers. So there's that. Literally not a deck. Probably also not a deck. We already kind of talked about Drytron. Also not a thing. Ice Jade is bad. Infernoble is bad. Sorry, Infernoid is not great. Karakuri is pretty mid. I want to put Kashtira here, but let's be honest with ourselves. Kashtira is actually still pretty good. I'm going to put it... Yeah, it's probably top of tier 3. It's not quite tier 2. It's fine. I've heard a lot of people say that it's like crazy, and I've heard a lot of people say that it's really bad. And the thing is, from what I've experienced, it's... at best. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just kind of like, well, it does its thing sometimes, and that is oftentimes enough, because being able to look at your opponent's extra deck and rip a card out of it and banish it face down with the Ablosis is pretty nice, and sometimes that just doesn't do anything. Like, for example, against Dragon Link, that's not really going to do much. Like, sure, you can get rid of their Borland, but then you have to deal with everything else, right? Or like, you know, banishing the gigantic Sprite from the Sprite for Hire deck isn't really going to do a whole lot. Banishing one of the Mirror Jades from Branded also isn't going to do a whole lot. So it's a lot of those things where it's like, yeah, you could Diablosis, but that's not really going to matter too much. As well as the rest of the game plan just kind of sucks. Like, yeah, sure, you could Diablosis once, and then maybe you have like a Fenris on your side of the field as well. But most of the time, you're probably not going to do that, so... yeah, the deck is missing a lot, so I really don't think that this deck is insane, nor is it bad. It's still good. It still has plays, but it's not as good. I think this is a crawler card. Doesn't matter. It's bad. Labyrinth. Labyrinth, I think it gets a big boost here, and the main reason for this is because with tier being less playable, and like milling your cards specifically, I do think that Labyrinth has a good shot at just being like good. Most of the other decks received a hit except for Dragon Link, which is why I have it at the forefront. And then Labyrinth just kind of didn't receive a hit. It's still very playable. It's still very good. It's a best of 1, so as long as you're not using the sleeves that are the lady, you're probably good at not just immediately telling your opponent that you're playing Labyrinth, and you probably will do a little bit better. But all things considered, I do think that this deck is still very strong, and probably one of the best, the top 3 decks. I'm going to say that. What is this? Layer of Darkness, not very good. Libromancer's not very good. I don't know what this, Lightsworn, I guess. Lightsworn's not very good. In fact, it actually lost one of its best cards in Merly, where it's just a normal summon, mill 3. Kaijus aren't great, not great. Let's talk Tri-Brigade, or more specifically, Lyrilisk Tri-Brigade. I do think that this actually does get a boost because of the power level of the decks going down. That's the only real reason as to why I'm going to put this above Rogue tier, is because the rest of the meta kind of just shifted down a little bit in terms of power level, and I never really thought that this deck was bad, or like, I think it just couldn't quite do enough, and now I do think that with less like insane combo decks and stuff like that, I do think that this deck is still is going to be just a slight cut above the rest of Rogue. Madolche is fine. Madolche honestly lost kind of nothing with this ban list, but it did lose a decent matchup in tier. No, it didn't. I'm lying. I have no idea. I'm just going to put it in Rogue. I think that's generally where it goes. Magical Musketeer isn't great. I believe this is Nephthys. I could be wrong. Marincess is pretty good. Marincess is pretty good. Similarly to other such cyber strategies, I think it's actually probably more positively situated, mostly due to the fact that it has a better matchup against Dragon Link, because turns out a single Bestial kills Mathmech. It just buries Mathmech and all of the Mathmech strategies. That's why this is not Mathmech, but Adagnister. Oh, speaking of, I'm actually going to put Mathmech below Lyrilisk. I do think that the other cyber strategies are just objectively better due to Bestials. I do think Bestials are still going to be quite heavily played. Although probably less played because there's less tier. Hard to say. I'm still gonna put it there. Mayakashi's bad. Megalith is bad. Weather Painter isn't great. Pure Melfi isn't great, and also Melfi Sprite has received massive hits because that kind of can't do a whole lot with the Sprite cards when there's like 4 of them. So, still, I mean, Melfi Sprite's good, but Melfi's just mid. I have no idea what this is. I have no idea what this is. This isn't... Oh, it's Infernoid. This one's Infernoid. This one's Cyberdark, right? No, No, I already did Infernoid. This one's Infernoid. What is this one? No idea. No idea. Genuinely have no clue. Monarch is bad. Mutant is bad. Naturia is interesting. I do think that it received a bit of a boost. And it was already pretty decent previously, as we saw with World Championship. Joshua Schmidt was able to pilot it to a World Champion finish, so there's that, or a championship, just period. So there's that. However, I still don't think that it's crazy. It's good, don't get me wrong, and it does play around Maxi, which is nice. But I don't think that matters as much when you can actually play things like Called By and Crossout and the like. So Maxi is less of an issue. So I don't think it receives that much of a boost. But I still would put it in tier 2. I still think it's pretty good. Not a playable deck. Also not a playable deck. Also not a playable deck. Orchis! Orchis received Girsu back at 3. Now it's in Rogue tier. Yeah, honestly, Orchis is still Orchis. It still does its thing, and having however many copies of Girsu doesn't really matter, all things considered. The deck just, it doesn't end on enough. And it's still inconsistent because it's still Orchis. It's still going to break. That's just how it works. But all things considered, I do think that it received a boost, so we're going to put it at the top of Rogue. Zark Turbo, not a thing. Phantom Knights are not even Rogue. I don't know. They're just whatever. Rika is interesting because I really don't think it's that strong, especially because of Maxi. But I still think that it has some really powerful plays if you don't get Maxi. I think if this was a TCG tier list, I would say probably tier 3. I'm gonna put it in Rogue because of the Roach. I do think that it's actually, if this was TCG, I'd probably put it tier 2. I think it's really good and very heavily underrated. But I'm gonna put it in Rogue. Plunder, you know, I still think that so many people are sleeping on my boy Blackbeard. Plunder is very good. It has been for quite some time. It plays well with a lot of the, especially if Fur Hire Runic becomes one of the meta decks. I think that boosts Plunder significantly, because that is literally every attribute except for Wind, which is the one attribute that Plunder doesn't have a ship for, which is very funny. So there's that. But I do think that no matter what, Runic Fur Hire is going to be less prominent, even if it is a very strong deck. So because of that, I don't think that that's going to like help Plunder in any particular fashion. But I do think that this is a very heavily slept on deck, similarly to Runic and the Fur Hire deck. They're strong, they're just not very explored nor played. Next up, we have Prank Kid. I will continue to say this for the rest of my life. I still believe that Prank Kid is slept on. I get that Maxi exists, and I totally understand that, but turns out ending on like just a full board of board wipes and stuff like that, especially now that tier is less prominent, I think is going to be a lot stronger. So that's just my thoughts. I still think it's good. I'm going to put it in Rogue. You can't stop me. I'm probably absolutely wrong, but there's that. I believe this is Predaplant. Anyway, moving on. Cyframes are bad. Punk lost actually a lot of its like game against Maxi because of the banning of Agido specifically, which makes it a bit weird. But I do think that Punk is pretty good, and there are a lot of Punk builds, specifically Punk tier, that I think will probably pop up a little bit more, that make it pretty good. I think it's better than Exo. Not by itself, but more so in various other builds. Next up, we have Cleefort. Raid Raptor. I believe this is Resonate. It's not Resonators, but like Red Dragon Archfiend. Jack Atlas's archetype. Dark Magician is, I mean, Dragoon is banned, so Dark Magician is bad. If Dragoon wasn't banned, a lot of decks would change, but no, this deck would still be bad. Bad. Okay, I'm gonna choose Runic as my stun deck. Though I don't see a whole lot of actual Runic stun. I more so see, you know, like Banish stun and stuff like that. However, I do think that stun will probably take up the Runic mantle again because of the pretty heavy limitations to tier. So because of that, I'm gonna put the stun deck above Mathmech, but below everything else in tier 3. Look, stun just works in the best of 1. If you're not prepared for stun, you do just kind of lose game 1, and normally the side deck is to help against stun. And while yes, there have been lots of hits to a lot of stun builds, more specifically, more recently, Rongo Nimiad. However, I don't think Rongo Nimiad was really the problem. At least with stun in particular. It is a problematic card, and it's good that it's banned. I was just saying, like, that's not what most people were playing for stun, because that's incredibly inconsistent. So, all in all, stun is still bad. However, it's still better than Mathmech, I would say. S-Force is bad. The Sacred Beasts are bad. Salamangreat. Where does Salamangreat fall? Salamangreat is interesting because with less graveyard hate, I believe there will be probably less graveyard hate running around. I do think that Salamangreat gets significantly better. However, it also plays very well against Bestials, which is nice. However, I do think that it just doesn't do enough. Ending on maybe a Counter Trap and a Baguska is nice, but it's probably not enough. I'm going to put it right next to Orcust. I think it's just like, it's been power crept at this point. Its end boards just aren't quite enough. Yes, having a whole bunch of hand traps is nice, but when you have to rely on playing Max C as one of those hand traps, which is such a dead card half of the time, that it really does create issues with how your actual plan plays out. For example, in the TCG, I think that this is significantly better, mostly due to the fact that you do not have to rely so heavily on drawing Max C or having Max C to play around as a guaranteed hand trap that you are playing. Instead, you can play things like Droll and Lockbird, you can play things like Nibiru, you can play things like, Imperm and Gammas and stuff like that, although Gamma is limited to 1 in the TCG, so there's that. But, like, you get my point. There are stronger hand traps that you could actually utilize instead of having to rely on Maxi and Ash Blossom, which just aren't really that strong. Like, yes, Maxi absolutely wins games, but as a hand trap, if it is not stopped, yes, it does technically end turns, but after having gone first, if you don't have Maxi, the rest of your hand traps, because you basically have to play Ash, are significantly worse, and you're probably not playing as many hand traps. And with everyone having outs to Maxi, or like plays around Maxi, it does mean that like you're also getting less advantage off of actually having a hand trap, as opposed to something like Droll, or Nibiru, or Gammas, or Imperms, or stuff like that. Other such cards. Scareclaw is... I don't know. Scareclaw is good. I'm going to put it above Orcus. Scareclaw is good. I don't really know what to say. I wouldn't really put it in tier 3 or anything like that. I definitely don't think it's better than Plunder, but it does have quite a bit going for it. It's basically Baguska. It has consistency playing through a lot of boards. It interacts very well against a lot of the meta cards and stuff like that. But the problem is like its consistency, and its end board is very easily breakable with almost every Link monster. There is a lot that just breaks the board, and that is a similar issue to these guys. Shaddoll is good. It has been, it will be, it will continue to be. Again, a very slept-on deck, I believe. I think a lot of people are... I think the biggest thing currently in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is the lack of people willing to play going second. A lot of people will just build a deck to go first, and that's it, because they think that they cannot play a deck going second. But I do think that with the limitation of the tier cards, with the limitation of things like that, I think that going second also receives a boost, which does mean that a lot of going second decks are also probably stronger, and more specifically, builds like Shaddoll that can go first and can go second, and more specifically, does do very well going second, is going to boost the strategy. Shiranui is just not great. 6M is just too inconsistent, similarly to Skull Servant. Sky Striker, Sky Striker, Sky Striker. I always have an issue with Sky Striker. It could be absolutely insane and be the best deck ever, or it could be absolutely garbage, and I have no idea, because sometimes it just wins events. You know, do you ever just all of a sudden see a Sky Striker player win? Now, granted, Mystic Mine is banned, but still. I'm going to put this in everything else. I really don't believe that Sky Striker is all that good. In fact, okay, I can't put it below Ancient Warriors, so we'll put it right above Ancient Warriors. I do believe Sky Striker is that bad, though. Sulfur Cord, Sprite. We kind of already talked about Sprite, so I'm just going to put it up here. I still think that Sprite's good. I think that there are a lot of variants to Sprite that are still very playable, most notably things like the Sprite For Hire, which I already mentioned, and Sprite Tri-Brigade, which we haven't mentioned. I do believe both of those variants are very strong and very good. Maybe not the second or even first best deck, some of the other variants, but I do think, again, the For Hire variant is probably up there, but I'm just going to put Sprite up there, even with the limitation to Jet. While I do think that a lot of the limitations do hurt the deck, I think that because of a lot of the other stuff being hit, and a lot of the other stuff being significantly lower in power level, it does mean that the deck overall is still good. What is the name of this? I know the name of the individual card. They are Spriggans, or Springans. Springguns. Springans are good. I think they're slightly worse than... Oh, they're probably... Okay, there we go. That fixed it in my brain. Yeah, Rika is definitely better than Jormungandr Turbo and Sargus Turbo. Spiral. Deer Lanta Spiral could be so very good, but again, because of the Roach, I don't think it's as good. I think it's in a similar spot to, like, Prank Kid. However, it does do quite a bit more than a lot of these other decks. I think it's even just better than Rika at the moment, because, hey, turns out Master Plan is still a thing, and it's very strong. And lots of stuff like that. I think they have basically a fully unlimited spiral, or, yeah, fully unlimited spiral. So, there you go. Subterror is not very good. Neither is Super Heavy Samurai. Although, watch out for that one. Two Ship's not great. Sword Soul's probably one of the best decks. Probably one of the best decks. This sprite being up here is bothering me. Oh well, it's fine. Sword Soul is still good into basically everything. It's great at going first, it's great at going second. It has the ability to play through quite a bit, while also being able to set up a board very efficiently. A lot of the boards that it ends on can end on Protoss, which means that Protoss Call Dark is still very strong, which is also one of the reasons why I think that this deck might be pretty good. But all things considered, just being able to call an attribute and be like, no, not that one, is very strong. What else? I mean, it's Sword Soul. I don't know what you want. It's Sword Soul. It's good. That's it. It doesn't play around Maxi the best, but it's still okay. Those decks aren't great. Oh, let's actually talk about Synchron for a second. The reason I'm not saying Synchron is great is mostly due to consistency issues. Yeah, if you can chain block your speeder to prevent you from immediately dying to Ash Blossom, that's nice, and then they just imperm you anyway, and you go, okay, cool, that didn't matter. Yeah, honestly, the deck just doesn't quite do enough. Tier is still top tier. I know what you're saying. How? Here's the thing. Even with only 2 names, you can still play just regular polymerization. That is still an option. You can still mill a lot of cards, but more specifically than any of that, the Danger Engine is still there, so even without the Ishizus, I think in a lower power format, as we have, I still think that the deck is good. I don't think it's as strong as it was, and it definitely won't be nearly as dominant. Losing Anagito, losing a Kelbeck, losing all of your Merleys, I do think that that does hinder the deck. More specifically, in the nature that you can no longer play things like Sprint to send Merle, and then immediately go off into a fusion there. That is a big change to the deck. And because of that, I do think that it will not be the best deck. But I still think it's good. And I know everyone is going to hate that, or at least the people who don't like tier are going to hate that, but I do think that you will see it significantly less, and it's not going to be something that is going to be nearly as difficult to play through, because they are going to be a lot more inconsistent. I know a lot of people had a problem with, like, they always got everything, but they're really not going to get much now. Soliek is at 1. Both of the other 2 fusion names are at 2. The only thing that's consistent is Rhinoheart and Scream. Which, like, hey, that's nice and all, but if your Scream doesn't hit anything, it's not going to do anything. So there you go. Constellar's not great. Angel isn't great. We've literally talked about weather. Am I wrong? That was Mech Knight. That one was Mech Knight. This one was weather. Oh my gosh, these really look like the exact same. No! Mech Knight's still bad. Weather is still bad. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They look the exact same. I just glanced at it. I'm so sorry. Cool, moving on. I think Thunder Dragon is still good. Okay, there are way too many decks here in Rogue. I'm going to move all of this. I'm sorry. I'm going to move everything down to everything else. I really don't think that there are that many Rogue decks. Yeah. Yeah. That looks better. Although, Altogeist also belongs down here. I'm sorry, Altogeist is way too high. Also, probably ABC. Time Thief isn't great. Tindangle isn't great. Trap Trick is pretty good. Trap Trick's still good. I think it's just one of the better decks right now. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's just consistent. It can play evenly matched, which makes it like decently good at going second. And actually like generate advantage off of a dead evenly matched in hand going first, which is also nice. So I don't know. It's fine. Tri Brigade. I don't know why this is the card for Tri Brigade. It should always be Shureg, but let's actually talk about Tri Brigade. Tri Brigade is one of the few decks that I do believe will be paired very well with Sprite, even with the limitations, which makes it a pretty decent deck. I know Tri Brigade player at heart. I do love Tri Brigade, but I do genuinely believe that Sprite Tri Brigade is going to be one of the better versions of Sprite, and because of that, I do think that, again, with Sprite still being a decently good deck, I do think that it'll be pretty good, all things considered. However, other such variants of Tri Brigade are definitely weaker. As I mentioned, the Literalist Tri Brigade, which is probably the second best version of the deck right now, is tier 3. And then like everything else is like mid. So, still good. I'm going to put it at the top of tier 2. Don't really have anything else to say. Trickstar is really good in Duel Links right now, so if you want to play Trickstar, there you go. True Draco's bad. UA is bad. I have to put this one in Rogue. I feel like I'm legally obligated to put this deck into Rogue, and the sole only explicit reason for this is because it turns out being able to send every card your opponent controls except for one to the graveyard on summon of a monster is pretty good. They don't even get a choice. They just send it all. They do get a choice. I'm lying, but like they don't get to respond to that. That's not an effect you can negate. That's just on summon. This hits the field. This condition has to be met, which is hilarious, and I hate it. And unlike something like Teekboo or the wide variety of other floodgates, this is something where you have to negate the summon and not the activation of an effect, which matters significantly. And because of that, in a best of one, it's going to steal a multitude of games, and I will always put it pretty high. Yeah, turns out being able to just like auto win games while also being a stun deck is pretty cool. Unchained, you know what? No, it's not better than Sky Striker. Sorry, I was about to put this in Rogue, but then I was like, nah, it's not that good. Valence and Vampires both aren't great. Vendred isn't great. Virtual World is genuinely good. Okay, not that good. It's better than Mathmech. Virtual World is a good deck. I think people just stopped playing it mostly because they just didn't like the way that it was playing anymore, but the deck is still good. You can still play Virtual World. You can still play Virtual World just as a whole. You can still play a wide variety of different variants of Virtual World. It's still a good deck. It's not nearly as good as it used to, but again, the power level of the format has gone down, and I do believe that it is strong. Yes, I do believe genuinely that it's better than Mathmech. Am I a crazy person? Very possible. Witchcrafter just isn't good. Yangsing just... Sorry, it isn't good. Spirits, I guess this would be... What is this, Yada Turbo? I don't know what that is. Not good. Zombies. Zombies are interesting. I think they get worse. This is weird because they get worse because tier is no longer in the game to kind of like have a good matchup for them and to like mill cards for them and stuff like that. So with Lesser Shizus, it may be better, it could be worse, it's hard to say. But with Dragon Link specifically, I do think that this is a boost for them because Dragon Link does specifically require dragons for a lot of its stuff. And so because of that, I do think that this deck is going to be a little bit better. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of Rogue. There you go. Zodiac is... Zodiac's interesting because, again, this is a variant of Tri-Brigade that you could play. Zodiac Tri-Brigade in particular. And it's still decent. It's not insane, but it's decent. I am going to put this in everything else. Despio, we've already talked about, and I don't know that one. So, here's the list. Ignore everything else. That is literally just everything else that was on here. But here is what I would expect to be more of the top tier strategies. And yes, I know it looks like not much has changed, because tier is still up here, Sprite is still up here, Dragon Link's still up here, etc., etc. But I may have put Dinosaur a little bit too high. I'm not gonna lie. But that's fine. It's my list. Anyway, but all in all, I do think that the meta overall has changed, and the main thing that has changed is the lower power ceiling. I think that not as high of a power level is now necessary to be a good deck and to be able to take games, which I personally don't like. I much prefer having a higher power level with like the top 4 or 5 decks, which is why I really enjoyed this past format. I thought it was very fun, but now I think a lot more decks have more viability, and so because of that, I think just kind of everything was raised up a bit in terms of chance of playing the game, of winning. And while it may not look like that because of the way that the ban list, or like this specific list, has shaken out, I mean, previously I had like 4 decks here, and now I have, again, 4 decks. But the decks have definitely changed. So I don't know. This is just off the top of the head with no real notes as to how the actual deck has, or the format has shaped out. Trying to say so many words is hard. But yeah, don't know actually what's going to happen. This is a predictive list. I am expecting these things to happen, these things to change, but I could be very wrong. Turns out Dragon Link could just be terrible or something like that, and it turns out Labyrinth in a best of 1 is absolutely insane, which I do expect, which is why it's up there. Or, you know, maybe Sword Soul is actually just really bad all of a sudden because reasons, I don't know. There could be a myriad of things that change for one reason or another. But yeah, anyway, predictive list, here it is. There you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. If you did, Alex very much so appreciated it. And if you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh!, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.